Hello, it's Robert here, fact-checking the stories that scare you. So this time, it's about this idea that we're going to have a deadly second wave in the United States or the world of COVID-19. Well, the only case we have, as far as I know, is the flu pandemic in 1918. And they don't even know why it was more deadly the second time. They have a virus sample from around there, from someone they found frozen in the Arctic, and they were able to extract the virus from their lung, and they don't know anything else about it. So they don't really know why that happened then, but there's no reason at all to expect it to happen to COVID-19. MERS and SARS didn't have a second wave. And COVID-19 is a coronavirus, which is very different from flu. It is also not seasonal. And there's no evidence at all of anything like that happening with COVID-19. So, but then the most important thing of all is to realise that our entire first wave needn't have happened. Now, I know that can be quite a difficult thing to take on board, but I think we have to realise this in order to understand why we can be sure that we won't have a second wave. So the WHO warned about this, so I go back here. This was in February, 25th of February of this year, and the joint WHO-China report said immediately expand surveillance to detect COVID-19 transmission chains by testing all patients with atypical pneumonias, conducting screening in some patients with upper respiratory illness, and adding testing to existing surveillance systems such as ILI and SARI. And we have those surveillance systems we have it in Britain, we have it in the United States. And back in February the 25th, they said we should immediately add COVID-19 surveillance. So they would test people who've got these ILI symptoms, like flu-like symptoms, and see if any of them have COVID-19. If we had done this, we would have detected COVID-19 in the United States, in Italy, and in the UK, and in many other countries, way back on February the 25th. It had already been in those countries since January, and we thought that all we had were the imported cases. If we had done that, we would have detected our outbreaks before they even started, and we would have stopped them. There's no doubt about it. And that wasn't even the first warning. Dr. Tedros, way back on the 23rd of January, the day of the Wuhan lockdown, he said all countries should be prepared for containment, including active surveillance, early detection, isolation and case management, contact tracing and preventing of onward spread. Hardly anyone listened. Singapore did. Singapore added ILI surveillance on the 28th of January, just 5 days after that. There were a few others that listened. The Faroe Islands, they listened. But hardly anyone paid any attention, and that is why we had the first wave, because we weren't looking. It is very ironic because Europe particularly donated a huge donation to Africa to help them make these preparations. But they didn't prepare themselves. And not only that, and now people kept saying, oh, China did it, we can't. New Zealand has shown that we can suppress it. Now in China, Hubei province is larger in population than California, and that was the only area of China that had a lockdown of the entire country. Again, everyone was saying, we can't do it. And when China did their first lockdown in January, then everyone else was saying, this won't work. And it did. And China was remarkably foresighted, far-sighted and quick acting. And when Dr. Tedros congratulated China, he was congratulating them as a scientist and epidemiologist. He was not talking about human rights. He was talking about the scientific way that they stopped COVID-19 by reacting in just a few days, not weeks, days. Meanwhile, the United States, New York in the United States, it for the first time achieved 100% contact tracing on the 11th of June. It first achieved an adequate amount of testing on the 29th of May. Months later, we could have done all of that way back when we only had a few dozen cases, and we would have hardly needed any tests and any tracing compared to what we need now. Here are some other examples that responded quickly. Vietnam responded quickly. The other provinces of China responded quickly. None outside Hubei province. We're talking about provinces as big as countries. The whole thing is 4 times the size of the United States. The provinces are larger than the United States states. They're the size of European countries. And none of them went over 2,000 cases outside of Hubei province. Many only had a few hundred, and quite a few had less than 100. Tibet had only 1 case. Of course, they could have underestimated it, but they do not have. They could have missed cases that didn't lead to anything. We have had cases, it's recently been discovered, that it was in Italy in December, and in France, I think in December too, from analysis of sewage, samples taken from sewage way back in December. Then Italy had it already. So if Italy had done widespread testing in January, it would certainly have found it. And in December, it was just a few sporadic cases. They can't have led to outbreaks. COVID-19 is very strange that way. It depends so much on the super spreaders. And you can have it come into a country and just fizzle out if you don't happen to have a super spreader. So probably those early cases just fizzled out, but they left their record in the sewage of Italy, in the samples taken back then. So we could have stopped this completely in February or early March, and then in late March, when countries did their lockdown, then the WHO again, and I listened to every press briefing by the WHO, and they were constantly saying this with every press briefing: do the surveillance, do the testing, do the tracing, way back then, way back to January, way back to whenever the first press briefing was. And then when we entered lockdown, instead of doing test, trace, isolate, the UK did lockdown. Italy was first to do lockdown, then UK did lockdown without any testing or tracing except overnight stays and hospital tests. And at that point, the WHO said, we have now got a precious second opportunity to completely stop COVID-19, not just slow it down, not just suppress it until we have a vaccine. We could have completely stopped it back then. And they said to all these countries during lockdowns, they said, go and find the virus. This is your perfect opportunity. Now that is what China did. When China did its lockdown in Wuhan, then its reason for doing the lockdown was to find the virus. One of its top reasons. It immediately ramped up its testing. It didn't have enough tests yet because it was very, very early, just developing the first tests. So what they did is they worked out a way of using CT scans, that if you have a high prevalence of COVID-19, so it's only when you've got high prevalence, then if you look for a particular kind of CT scan on your lungs, there's a distinctive appearance of COVID-19 even before it appears in the tests. Now that's going to turn up lots of false positives if you haven't got much COVID-19, because some people who don't have COVID-19 will have the same appearance. But in a particular situation, most of the people who they found with these CT scans had COVID-19. So that is how they found them very quickly early on. They had these fever clinics. Anyone who had a fever had to go to the fever clinic. They went through it very quickly, and just in a few minutes they did a result. And if they had a CT scan that looked like COVID-19, then they had to isolate. And then they would trace all their contacts. So China was doing that way, way back. And they had these huge wards to separate people from their families, because the people most at risk if you've got COVID-19 are the others in your own household, and unlike flu, it does not automatically spread to everyone in your household before you have symptoms. Most people don't pass it on. That's why you had those huge makeshift hospitals in stadiums, no intensive care units. These were just people with very mild symptoms. They had their books and their laptops and so on, and doing their best to keep on with their life while sitting in a stadium or something in a makeshift ward to stay away from their family, because they didn't want to infect their own families. So China was doing all that in January. Many countries in Europe and the United States are not yet doing this completely. As I said, New York has only just done the complete contact tracing, only just done the complete testing. Many are not isolating people from their households, so if they go home and they infect their households when they get sick, especially if they're in crowded conditions, like that may be why we have high levels of COVID-19 in deprived areas in the UK. Maybe part of the reason that they can't isolate from the rest of their household easily. So we had this opportunity and we didn't take it. And I said there's generosity, huge donation from the EU, well over 100 million, I think it was 123 million or some huge amount. And the US, they just were complacent because they had done their travel ban with China, and they thought that that would protect them, even though the WHO kept saying to China, to the US, travel bans do not protect you. And now the US is saying back to Wuhan saying back to WHO, you told us that a travel ban won't protect us, and now we've got COVID-19. I mean, what's he talking about? They were warning them all along that a travel ban won't protect them. And then they did get COVID-19. The virus went round the travel ban. I mean, apart from anything else, the travel ban in the United States did not apply to US citizens in China who wanted to go home. So there were tens of thousands of people came back from China who just evaded the travel ban because it didn't apply to them. And other people went around it in other ways. So it didn't do anything. Well, all it did is encourage complacency. It may have kept a few cases out, but it meant that the US didn't look. So it's important to realise all this, because what this means is that we can stop it. The US could have stopped it, heck, we all could have stopped it. And if we get a second wave, we will be able to stop it. There's no reason to expect it to be more deadly at all. There's a second wave. So what is a second wave? And I've just... so the thing is that flu evades our immune system by mutating. And it has a very unique way of mutating. It's kind of chunked into bits, big bits. And one flu virus can swap an entire chunk, huge chunk, with another flu virus. And that is why flu can mutate so quickly and can look completely different and not work with the vaccines anymore, because the bit the vaccine was used against has been swapped with another flu virus. And COVID-19 can't do that. COVID-19 also has an error correction mechanism which keeps it very stable. It has only a few mutations. It does mutate enough so you can notice the difference, but only tiny mutations, just one amino acid here and there. That sort of mutation usually does not help the virus at all. It's a bit like going to your bicycle or your car and randomly twisting a little bit of the handlebars or changing the shape of one of the cogs in the gear assembly. And the chances is very low that that will actually be of any benefit to your bicycle. And most changes won't do anything, and some will make things worse. And so it's very, very unlikely that we actually get a significantly changed strain, even with millions of cases. It would take rather longer, it would take years. We might get a case, we might get a change, they're monitoring carefully, but it's not like flu, it's not likely. It's very slow. So far they haven't noticed anything. Nothing significant, minute changes that people write papers and preprints about, and they come to flawed conclusions. So, and then the other thing is, that's about there's no and then this interview with the doctor and the WHO explain that they've got no evidence of any change. So how do we get second waves? Well, relaxing suppression obviously leads to a second wave. So if you manage to go down to say 100 cases a day from 10,000 cases a day, and then you relax lockdown, then you're just going to go up again. It doubles every 3 days if you don't, 3 to 5 days if you don't suppress it. So if you stop suppressing, it's just going to go up again. So of course that will be, go down, 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 then you stop suppression, go down, 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 stop suppression, it'll just go up again. So that's an totally unsurprising kind of a second wave, but it's really just taking your eye off the ball. Another kind is that you could have a herd immunity second wave. So this whole idea of natural herd immunity, it doesn't work at all. Herd immunity means basically you're not doing anything to control it. Now, if you have natural herd immunity, if you're vaccinated herd immunity, you can immunize more than are needed, and you can stop it. But natural herd immunity slows it down until there's a little trickle of cases going on. Then once you've only got a few cases going on, then it won't go any further. That's how natural herd immunity works. You have a constant trickle of little outbreaks at the point of natural herd immunity. This means that if you've got people shielding, they'll have to shield forever. You can't protect them by surrounding them by people who've got herd immunity, because if it's natural herd immunity, it'll just keep trickling through and get to them. And if you have herd immunity, then COVID-19 belongs to a type of virus that triggers a very weak immune reaction, because it's covered with glycans, a kind of sugar, which hide most of it from the immune system. Luckily, it's not as thick a covering as HIV, which is so covered you don't get immune reactions at all, not ones that are any good. But with COVID-19 you do get reactions, but they're likely to be very weak. The worst case scenario for coronavirus colds, a quarter of our colds are coronavirus colds, OSC 43, you can get reinfected by the identical virus 4 weeks after you got over the last one. Now, it could be anything between 4 weeks and a couple of years or so, but eventually your herd immunity will stop working and it'll just go through everyone again. So that's another kind of second wave, that if you did build up to a herd immunity, thank goodness, most countries have completely stopped that idea. Even Sweden, then the person who originated the idea said it was a bad idea and a mistake. But if it had gone all the way through to natural herd immunity, then that would have this constant trickling, so either constant shielding or the old people get it, which means up to a fifth of them die, all the old people die, of the over 80s, or else they're constantly shielded from then on. They can never lead a normal life again until the vaccine. And if you're doing natural herd immunity, then eventually it will go through the entire population again, because everyone will lose their immunity. It's just a question of how soon. Some will lose it after sooner than others. Some might lose it as soon as a few months, or even 4 weeks. We don't know. And some, it might last for a couple of years. But eventually, it's going to go through everyone again, and then again, and then again, and every time they have a new chance to die of it. So natural herd immunity is hopeless. And it's really hard to understand how epidemiologists anywhere even thought of that idea. Certainly I got lots of critics by other epidemiologists saying this is not going to work for a coronavirus because you don't have indefinite immunity, and they also said that it's just unethical and it's not the right way to deal with the disease anyway, because it's basically not controlling it, and the shielding won't work because it'll trickle through. So then the last way you could have a second wave is a persistent infection. So there's some diseases that works for. That's with measles. So you can get measles, you can be completely over it, you think, but you've got a persistent infection, and months later measles flares up again. So it is possible that, like measles, some of the people with COVID-19, we just haven't had it long enough. That who knows, maybe 3 months, 5 months later, it flares up again like measles. So that is the other possibility, and that is the main reason that, for instance, New Zealand, even though it has stopped all incoming cases, it still has to do surveillance of everyone, just in case there is a resurgence like for measles. It's very unlikely, but it does happen. There's some evidence it happens for coronaviruses in bats, that they may have resurgences like this. Not a very strong study, but out of 42 bats, 7 of them had multiple detections over 12 weeks of the same virus, which suggested that the virus had resurged. It's not a very strong study, but it's a possibility. And in case of SARS, it's able to hide in some special cells in the human's small intestine in this way. So it could be that COVID-19 does that as well. It's gone from the lungs, but there's some other cells in your body somewhere where it lingers, and then once the rest of your body and the immune system has sort of forgotten about it, then it comes back again because of this short-term immunity. So it could be that it will just rise up again. In some people you get a resurgence like measles. So we do have to watch out for a second wave. But those second waves can be stopped in exactly the same way as the first one could have been stopped, by doing testing, tracing, isolation. So for this reason it's very important. So China, when it stopped all its, when it had completely eradicated its cases from China, it still kept everything going, enough to cope with a new wave. Testing capacity, intensive care spare capacity, and the tracers, they're still there ready to be called up if they're needed. They wouldn't still be employing them, but they would have some agency and say, can you supply us with 1,000 contact tracers in a hurry if we need it. So these countries who have managed to pretty much eliminate it should still be keeping all their capabilities and personal protection equipment. Have got the capability to immediately provide everyone once more with PPE every day. So you keep all those capabilities ready to put into action, the same capabilities we should have had in January or February of this year. If we had had rapidly increased testing capacity, which we have shown we could do, we did that in May, June. If we had done the exact same thing we did in May, June, if we'd done that in February, then we would have had plenty of testing capacity and we would be able to find it very quickly. And if we had ramped up in personal protection equipment, again, like we did in March, April, if we'd done that in February, then we would never have had people having to treat COVID-19 without the adequate equipment. And if we had prepared an army of contact tracers, just not employed them yet, but just worked out who was going to do it, sourced the companies that would do it, or sourced which departments in your government are prepared to shift over to doing contact tracing, or which local community organisations will do it, and trained them in it. If we'd done all that in February, then we would have had plenty of contact tracers to deal with the first few hundred cases that we would have found with the surveillance. We'd have found maybe a few dozen, maybe a few hundred cases in January, February with surveillance. We would have had isolated them straight away. We would have had the contact tracers there to trace all their contacts, and we'd have just stopped. So that is very important to recognise, I think, because this is how we can be sure that we won't have a second wave, because we have learnt our lesson. Now, sadly, there are some states that haven't learnt their lesson even now, like Arizona. Arizona is not stopping its first wave, so it's not going to, it couldn't stop a second wave. But Arizona is sure to start, so I'm going to talk about that in a second in my next video, that these countries that have been so slow in responding, but they are going to respond, they are going to stop. It's the experience of the history of COVID-19 so far is that no country or state stops once it gets to the point where large numbers of old people are dying, and especially when people start dying in large numbers in the care homes, that's when they definitely stop, and they just don't let it keep going. And also when you've got the actual experience, young people actually have experience that one of their friends has spent 6 weeks on a ventilator, then they sober up and they take it much more seriously, and then they do the physical distancing. Or it's in the news that the first few young people are starting to die as well, because that does happen once you've got thousands of cases, hundreds of thousands of cases, then a tiny percentage of young people dying start hitting the news as well, and people really start to take it seriously, and all the doctors and nurses dying and all the other things that happen as it becomes a big outbreak, then they take it seriously, then they bring it down. So this is definitely going to happen. It's not going to go up forever in the United States. And in the places that had big outbreaks early on, like New York, it's coming way, way down because they are taking it seriously. And their neighbours are taking it seriously, just like happened with the neighbours with China, entire China, and with Italy. Then Spain takes it seriously, Germany takes it very seriously, Denmark takes it seriously. The UK is a bit politically too far from Italy and doesn't take it so seriously. It's neighbours that seem to be the main thing that lead to people taking it seriously, apart from occasional countries that have very fast-seeing leaders or something. And anyway, so that's that. That's all I want to say there. So please don't worry about the second wave. We've got to stop the first wave. If we stop the first wave and suppress it completely, we can go way, way, way down. We can go back very much to the way things were before it started, not completely until we have a vaccine, but we can get down. So like in the UK, in Scotland where I am, they at last took it really seriously. They did proper tracing. I'm not sure if they've done it quite as thoroughly as China did, but pretty thoroughly. We are down to 9 cases a few days ago. Today it's 15. I can see that eventually it's going to go just way down till we've got hardly any in Scotland, and there'll only be imported cases coming from other countries, including England. And then England will do it as well, and to the Europe as a whole is really controlling this quite well now. So the United States definitely can. Anyway, so I'll stop that now. Be sure to, as usual thing, you can like and subscribe if you want to hear more of these things. And if you get scared, we have our Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked. If you are good at fact-checking in doing a rigorous, proper testing, not just going and saying, oh, I believe, or I saw this story on in the Daily Express and I think this. That's not fact-checking. So, but if you are good at proper fact-checking, finding the right sources, or you know from your own experience, then we really welcome fact-check, because it can make a huge difference. And then if you're scared, then that makes a huge difference. The people there can help you, and if you're empathic, especially if you're good at talking to people who are autistic or who are bipolar with manic depressive, those seem to be amongst the worst affected people for some reason. It's not everyone. More than half of us of the people in Doomsday Debunked are neither of those. But the prevalence of those is very high. Probably about a quarter are autistic and a fair number are bipolar. And these conditions make it especially difficult to filter out fake news and exaggerated statements by journalism. So if you're good at reassuring people with these conditions, you're very, very welcome in the group, and you're sort of communicating with them in a kind of simple, direct, clear fashion that is needed when talking to someone, especially if they're very far in the autistic spectrum and they need simple, straightforward statements. And just to explain clearly, this is fake news, this is not true, this is a story, this is fictional. Anyway, so very welcome anyone who comes to our group. So I'll stop this now and upload it, and I'll do a shorter one about how the various states are doing